we need to talk about Brandon Sanderson's lecture series. So, I'm Nicole Wilbur. I am a writer and I love these lectures literally so much, and I just want to talk about them all the time. So, I decided, why not? Let's talk about them together. So, I'm going to be doing recap, watch party, fangirl, I don't know, lecture videos for all, at least of the core lectures. So probably not the Q&As, but the core lectures themselves. We are starting from the very beginning with lecture number 1. Now, I think if there is one video every beginner needs to watch, it's this lecture. Beginner writer needs to watch. It's this lecture from Brandon Sanderson. I love his approach so much, because it's so nuanced and it's so rational and it's so educational. I mean, obviously it's a classroom environment. He's an educator, right? He's not trying to sell you a book on the one methodology that will change your life. He talks about his advice being a toolkit with some tools that will work for you and many won't. And honestly, I'm so here for it. I love it. This is so wonderful. I believe in free education, and the fact that he put these lectures online is just, incredible. I think it's amazing. There are a few points in this lecture that are a little more controversial that I really want to get your thoughts on. Like, should you write 5 books before you try to publish? I don't know. We'll discuss this later on. But there's something about him talking about writing that makes you want to run away and write, except you also want to binge his lectures all day. So it's a little bit of a dilemma. But my aim for this video is to recap some of the advice and then try to apply it on the spot, or at least pull in more examples and just kind of discuss it and talk about all the writing things and get in the comments and do some debating and stuff. Here, this lecture is very philosophical though, so we will be too. And let's jump right into it. So there's kind of 5 parts to this lecture. So he starts with talking about how to approach writing advice. And basically what he says is you will learn more writing your first book than any person or I can possibly teach you. Because writing is about doing. It's about experimenting, exploring, and discovering what works for you. This is great advice. Totally into it. I love the idea that no one advice is right, because no piece of writing advice will work for every single person ever. I've yet to find anything that's universal, even things that I might think are universal, but they're not, because everybody's a little bit different. I do think though that thinking of all writing advice as a tool is such a powerful thing. And it's so valuable to have them. There are so many pieces of advice that I never understood or applied for years. And then all of a sudden, late in the writing process, I'm now I get it. I get it now. Kill Your Darlings, I didn't really understand until 2 years ago, when I started basically slashing up my book and really going in and doing editing. And it was a 3rd or 4th draft or something. And I was oh, I get it now. And there's other pieces of advice that have done the same thing. That they kick in at a certain stage, and you're wow, I'm really glad I had that in the back of my head and I knew that, and now I can pull it out and use it. Just having it in your arsenal is so helpful. Even things if you're having trouble if you're having trouble getting into a pattern, you can remember write every day as advice and be why don't I try that for a week and just see how it goes. And you can kind of, I don't know, just kind of get your head around things like that. Even, I think he says specifically, you can pull these out particularly when things go wrong. Because a lot of us, we have really strong intuition for how to write a story. We've been living our lives around stories. So when something goes off, that's when you pull out, okay, what do I know? What can I use here to fix my problem? Then he starts talking about, there's a section to the lecture called joining the NBA, or nobody asks you why you're not joining the NBA. And I love this point too. Brandon makes the point that it's completely okay to write because you love it. You don't have to want to publish. You can just do it because you love to write, and it's just as valid as playing pickup basketball, or my dad in his hockey leagues, or all of these different things that people do, or making your pottery, or going to a paint night class thing. I feel so many of these don't have the added pressure of what are you going to do with it like writing does. I personally had a moment recently where I was why do I even want to publish? Like, it really did hit me. I was like, why? Why am I bothering with this? Because we all want people to read our work, but like, I have an interesting, I want to write stories, of course, that people love and get into, but it's almost like, it's very separate, right? Like, once the book is out there, the book is kind of out there, and they have their own journey with the book, and maybe I'll get some feedback or whatever, but like, readers experience the book how readers experience it, and I'm almost not a part of that relationship. So the idea of tons and tons of people reading it, very exciting, but like, not that motivating, because it doesn't feel like, it's a moment of connection, but like, the connection was like written like 3 years ago, and then someone reads it now. And anyways, I thought about it, and I think of it more as a means to being able to do what I love times 10. Like, I have to write anyways to breathe and survive. So not to survive, but like, I have compelled to write. This sounds so artsy and ridiculous when I say it, but like, if I don't write for a long time, I get very grumpy. So I have to do it anyways. And if I could make money with it so I could do it more, that would be sweet. Like, obviously writing is connection. That's important. I want to share it, but a lot of it really is like just selfish. I want more time. I want to be able to realistically spend more time on my writing and be able to, I don't know. I already take it seriously, so I don't have to take it more seriously. And obviously, like, writing isn't a job that most people can do full time, but I just think it would be, I don't know, interesting. I do think of it as like there's like the writing, and there is like a business opportunity, and it's an interesting business opportunity. Anyways, but we don't have to do that, right? Like, if I never publish a book, I'm gonna keep trying. But like, I'll have them. So I don't know. I'm interested in what you think about this advice. Okay, the third part was where he really went into, this is like the controversial bit that I feel like if I was a newbie hearing this, I'd be like, I'm sorry, what? When he says, you should probably write about 5 books before you try to get one published. And he describes it like this. The first few books are about discovery, finding your voice, experimenting with style, learning how to write. And when you get published, you have to start dealing with deadlines and pressure and publicity and interviews and reader expectations and all of this stuff. And this is funny because I haven't heard the 5-book thing before, and I think he's just kind of pulling that number out. It's almost as a little bit of like a running joke, like, I wrote 5 books before I got one published. But I have heard a few people say this, where they really don't love that like their first book or their second book or whatever got published. So for example, for me, I actually have written 5 books, I think. Yeah, no, I've written 6. I've written 6 books. And I do think that every book I write is better than the last. Like, I know 1837, which was a book I wrote years ago, it's a hot mess, and I'm super glad I didn't put it out there. Even publishing, I published a novella at Christmas time, which I love, and I think it's good, and I'm like, this is a great read. But as I was rereading it, I was like, I can write better than this now. Not that I didn't edit it, but just like the ability to tell a bigger story, a story that I think would be more emotional. I have more ability to do that. So I was like, I'm glad I published it, but I know that sounds daunting. There are obviously exceptions to this rule. There are so many exceptions to this rule. R.F. Kuang, I think, the one who wrote Yellowface, but she also wrote The Poppy Wars before that. She wrote The Poppy Wars. It was like her first book. She was in university, published it. Now The Poppy Wars is amazing. Now Yellowface was like the biggest book ever. And I mean, she seems to be doing fine. But I do find that anytime you talk to someone like that who has success with the first book or whatever, there always is trouble at some point. Like, the challenge comes and the rejection comes and whatever it is, it does come somewhere in the journey. It's just where. And I do think that I do get influenced by hearing like what beta readers and others think about my work. So I can only imagine your very first book where you're trying to explore and figure out your style and blah, 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 blah. And then getting all this reader feedback, that must feel like an onslaught. there's like a lesson in patience for us here. It also does make me feel better because I'm about to query my 5th book. It's the first one I've ever queried, but it's my 5th book. And I'm writing my 6th, and yeah, seeing other people's experiences on YouTube and such, we do tend to write a lot of books before we're catching momentum. So it sounds very controversial and very daunting, but like, I don't know, what do people say? You're gonna spend the time anyways, like the time's gonna pass anyways, so may as well write your books. Okay, then kind of at the end, well, we're not quite at the end there, we get into the writing group concept. Now, I'm skimming over stuff. This is just sort of the highlights for me. But he talks about writing groups, and I really love the story of his writing group. How so many of his writing group from his course are professional writers in some capacity. I will say, though, I have no idea how he did this. It is so hard to make long-term critique partners. I have some, but it took a while to find them. And it's really hard to find a writing group like that, like one that has longevity that you continually to meet regularly. I've done critique groups and had great feedback. But when he's talking about like the pitfalls and blah, 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 I think those are things to be really taken seriously. I do worry that I let people's feedback influence me kind of early on. One of the things that I've liked to do is to get really early feedback. So my 6th book, the first 15,000 words or so are always very experimental. I haven't quite figured out the story yet. I just got tired of trying to outline it, so I'll just write it. I've done this, again, 6 times, where I'm like, I'm going to outline the book, and then I like outline part of it. I'm like, I'm bored, I'm going to write it now. And then I write 15,000 words, and I'm like, this isn't working, and then I go back to the drawing board. But anyways, I got feedback on my most recent book at a very early stage, and it made me aware of the problems that readers would have and challenges I would encounter. So I liked having these in mind a lot. For me, it didn't influence me that much to get early reader feedback. I liked the idea that I knew about the problems and could kind of fix them in advance as part of the story. But I agree, like I can see where it would throw you off to get that early reader feedback. And I can see where writing groups aren't for everybody. One of the biggest pitfalls for me is actually not if people say something's bad, if they say it's good. I feel more attached to it. Like people liked that, oh, I don't want to get rid of it. When the story may have evolved past that when I finally get to editing. And I just get very anxious. I'm like, oh my God, they're saying all these great things about like the first 5,000 words. The rest of the book can't possibly be as good as those 5,000 words. I never read anything that good again. And then I just get crazy. I'm less worried about what people say they don't like unless there's an overwhelming response, because I can usually dig deeper and find out what they don't like and fix it. This is where I think his chef versus cook metaphor really comes in, because if you tell the chef that you don't like the chicken, he can go in and look at the ingredients and figure what went off and like the spicing or the seasoning, or I don't cook. But the cook is going to be like, oh, I don't know. And so I love the chef versus cook metaphor, which we haven't talked about yet, but Brandon Sanderson spends a long time chatting about it. And I think that's really where this comes in, as in like the chef isn't going to be like, oh, you thought it was too salty, let me just take the salt out. The chef is going to be like, let me look at all of my ingredients as a whole, being the expert, and see how I can make this be more palatable. And maybe it's not even the salt. Maybe there's something else that I need to fix that would address that reading experience. And finally, one of the biggest takeaways that I loved and that I like want to put on my wall from this lecture is the product of your writing time is you. It's not the book, it's you. You are continually growing as a writer. You are continually growing as a person, someone with empathy, with nuance, with observation. You're honing your skills, you're also honing yourself. It's a beautiful mindset. It's gorgeous. I can't wait for the next lecture. We're going to end our little discussion here. Tell me what you thought of the advice in the comments, and if there was anything that stuck out to you more. I am going to be posting a lot of videos this week to catch up with Brandon Sanderson, so keep an eye out. I always publish them around 9 in the morning. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.